My first rental property caught on fire, and that's not the only L I took on this property. So I bought this thing back in the early stages of COVID, back before, all the lockdowns and everything started to happen. And so I was starting to think that there could be so much that could go wrong on this property. For example, what if I can't find a tenant once it's done? What if the tenant doesn't pay rent because they lose their job, because everyone was losing their job during that time as well? But anyways, I said, whatever. It's already done. We're going to push forward. This thing was built back in like the 50s, and it was pretty much all original. So everything had to be redone. When we first looked at the property, we knew that the previous owner did some work to it, built his own patio, whatever. We made sure that it was legitimate. We checked with the county, and we did find permits that stated that yes, he did it properly. And if you've done any renovations before, then you know the demolition part is the scariest part of any renovation project. Because when you're inspecting that property, you have no idea what's hiding behind those walls. You can't just rip holes in the wall when you don't own the property yet. And so once you do the demolition, you get to see that property in its entirety. And you get to see all the little things that you missed that led into problem number one. As I mentioned before, we knew that the previous seller was doing some of his own work on the property, made an addition and stuff like that. But what we didn't expect is the previous seller doing his own electrical work. Don't do that. We opened up the walls and we found very sketchy wiring that he did, and we had to fix it. The electrician came over and checked it out and was like, no way, we're not keeping this. We have to redo all the wiring in this house. And so a couple grand later, we got new wiring throughout the house. Thankfully, the rest of that renovation project went pretty smoothly. We're in the final stretch of this renovation. We got the kitchen completed with the cabinetry in, the countertops in, the tile backsplash was in, everything was beautiful. The bathroom was done, completely renovated top to bottom. And the only things we had left were like the small stuff, like touch-up stuff, the trim stuff and things like that. And I'm sitting here thinking like, there's nothing else that can go wrong with this property, right? Wrong. I get a call from my project manager and he's like, hey Jin, there is a fire at your property. That's funny, man. Anyways, no, seriously, what's up? Yeah, no, there was a fire at your property, but we don't know all the details yet. I just heard about it. I'm headed over there now. I'll let you know more details as soon as I find out. Anyways, the GC goes over there and he sees the neighbor standing outside. Turns out the neighbor was the one that saw the fire and put out the fire with his own fire extinguisher. Fun fact, that neighbor just happened to be a firefighter. Lucky me, I guess. The general contractor goes inside the house to see what was going on, and there's nobody there. The entire crew is gone. So the GC calls the subcontractor and was like, hey man, did you know there was a fire at the job site? And the subcontractor goes, no, and they just let me know that they just finished up and left not too long ago. So the GC responds, well, there was a fire, and I need you over here right now. So the subcontractor gets over there, and they're looking at the damage together. And the subcontractor has the audacity to blame the electrical wiring. When we look at the outlet, though, there's no evidence of that. But when you look at the outside, you can clearly see where the fire had started from the bottom of the window and it went up into the roof area. Thankfully, the exterior is made of stucco, which is pretty fire resistant. But the things that did catch fire was the wooden window frame and the rafters up in the ceiling. On the inside, you can see that the outlet is perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, the wiring inside is still intact. It's not melted. It's not burnt. There's no evidence of any fire inside. Because if there was a fire inside, then that drywall would have been gone. It would have been toast. And on top of that, the entire ceiling would have been smoked out. It would have been blackened by all the soot and all the smoke. But we didn't see any evidence of that. We believe that this fire started outside, and that was that. The subcontractor stayed adamant that there's no way that his guys did it. It had to have been the electrical wiring, blah, 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 blah. And so the GC calls the electrician to come back out and double check the entire wiring. Electrician's like, bet, I'll come out. Comes out, looks at it, and of course, everything is perfectly fine. So the GC goes back to the subcontractor and is like, look, man, you know it was your crew. Your crew was the last people in there. There's nobody in the property afterwards, and the neighbor was the one that saw the fire. And of course, the subcontractor stayed adamant. It was not his crew. There's no way it was him. and they started hashing it out. And if you thought it couldn't get any worse than that, well, then you're wrong. Because while the GC and the subcontractor were hashing details out of how they're going to handle this, it starts to rain. And if you remember, I just had a decent sized fire in the back that went up into the roof area and a hole was burned into it. So when it started raining, water did what water does and it went into that hole. Eventually, enough water fell into that hole and then collapsed the entire ceiling on the inside. And that's what you're seeing right now. So while the GC is still trying to figure things out with the subcontractor, he pulls money out of his own pocket to get over there and does like a temporary fix. He puts some plastic sheeting up, some temporary wood to just prevent any critters from going up into the attic and whatnot. Eventually, the subcontractor concedes and says, hey, look, I'll take care of the damage. Just don't go through my insurance. Just let me know how much it is and I'll pay you guys out. The subcontractor still stayed adamant that it wasn't his fault. And to this day, we have no idea exactly what started the fire, who started the fire. And I guess we'll just never know. In the end, it cost me $0 extra, but an additional 2 weeks of renovation time.